What happens if you try to reduce most recoil out of a stock Springfield Echelon? We played with a lot of different builds, and we think we found the one that ultimately does it best. We're gonna start this with a build breakdown, but the first thing you're gonna need is a compensator. That's gonna be doing a lot of the heavy lifting here. The second thing is going to be weight. These two elements are gonna be what we focused on with this build, and you're gonna see we tried to add as much weight as possible, including a very large optic, which could have actually hurt us or helped us. We're gonna go over all of the accessories on this build, starting with the frame. With this, we're actually gonna show you guys the recoil numbers for each component. How much recoil the compensator reduced, how much recoil this anchor reduced, and how much recoil the frame reduced. So starting with the frame, here we have an aluminum Mischief Machine Commander frame. This is the full-size frame, and we actually have a compact slide in here nested with some integration for the compensator. This is an aluminum frame, so it's gonna be a little bit heavier than your stock frame. In my opinion, this frame does have better ergonomics and a much better of a system. That's not really what we're gonna be focusing on today's video. So if you guys wanna see all my thoughts on this frame, make sure you drop a comment down below, and maybe we can actually compare this to the Icarus frame. However, an aluminum frame is just gonna be the ticket here. More weight equals less recoil. So we put on this full-size frame, and one thing I like that Sig Sauer actually does is they leave these big slots where you can put tungsten weights in the frames. We cannot do that with this frame. So that is something I'd like to see in the future, especially with the Springfield Echelon really leaning into the competition market, which honestly this gun would be perfect for. When it comes to actually shooting with this frame, the ergonomics help a lot, but the weight is really where you notice it. It's gonna help fight some of that recoil. You know, even if you did not have a compensator in here or the Harrington Arms anchor, you're just gonna get a lot more weight added to the build, which ultimately is going to deaden the in-the-hand felt recoil and the muzzle flip. One thing that is not really weight focused on this frame is going to be the grip texture. I really wasn't expecting this to help a lot with recoil, but it does. With the more aggressive grip texture on here, it is just gonna make this gun feel planted in your hand, further helping reduce some of that recoil. So when it comes to the actual recoil reduction of this frame, it is only 4.5% over the polymer counterpart. That's not a lot, but it's definitely going to put it in the right direction when it comes to recoil. It's also gonna have better grip texture, which is not measured by the actual ransom rest testing that we can do. So this is more for the end user actually noticing the deadening recoil of this frame. 4.5% is not a lot, but it's definitely going to help. Moving our way up into the TLR-1 here. The TLR-1 is actually going to reduce 10% of recoil. So if you just throw a regular TLR-1 on any handgun, you're gonna get a 10% reduction in muzzle flip. This is great, and this is something that I've always appreciated about throwing weight on the end of a handgun is I always run a weapon light because I think it's important to see what you have to shoot at, especially when it comes to a home defense type situation. So with the 10% of the light and the 4.5% of the frame, you get 14.5% of reduction of recoil with these two elements. And now that brings us to the big heavy weight on the front of this. This is the new Harrington Arms anchor. We were prototyping this and we thought it was a little bit gimmicky. We thought it could definitely work if you think about the physics of a weight on the end of a handgun. It's gonna reduce recoil, but we had overwhelming interest in this product and it kind of makes sense when we look at the numbers. So the anchor is essentially just a brass weight that goes on the front of the TLR-1HL. It does not work on the HLX. I know we're gonna get a million comments about that. The way the system works, it just won't work. And there is a through hole. So the reason we did this is for competition shooting. Theoretically, according to USPSA standards, people can run this on the end of their handgun and it is going to reduce recoil and not violate any rules. However, if you just want a really cool range toy, this is also gonna be great for you. This one is Cerakoted black. There are brass versions available. Really, Harrington Arms is going after a couple different things. Our biggest thing is going to be making you a more proficient shooter. And with that, reducing recoil is a large portion of what we focus on. If you could theoretically eliminate recoil, you could be a very fast and accurate shooter. So that's what we focused on at Harrington Arms. That's why we thought this would be a great product, and it definitely works. So with the frame, the TLR-1, and the anchor, you get a 32% reduction in recoil, which is honestly fantastic. That is without the compensator on here, and we'll get to those numbers later to kind of break that down a little bit more. But a 32% reduction in recoil is what we typically see out of a compensator alone. So I'm really excited to show you guys the numbers once we get all this combined. In terms of how this feels to shoot, it's definitely gonna feel different than what you're used to with a compensator. You can actually feel that weight working and reducing some of the muzzle flip. It feels very far out. So when you present the gun, it feels natural, but as you're performing your draw, the gun does feel very front heavy. It's something you're gonna have to get used to, but it is going to reduce a lot of recoil. And I remember the first time I shot it with a compensator, I think I giggled a little bit. It's kind of funny how much recoil it can reduce. So it's a really unique way for people to reduce recoil, and honestly, it's a great learning tool. If you don't want to spend a bunch of money on a barrel and a compensator, you can throw this on there for newer shooters to actually get used to the recoil of a 9mm handgun, Talking about that, we actually took this down to a training event, and at that event we had a lot of interest and a lot of overwhelming support for this product. So ultimately that's why we brought it to market. I know we're gonna get questions, so let's go ahead and talk about holster fitment. This is a T-Rex Arms Ragnarok holster. All of T-Rex's holsters have an open front for the weapon light. So this just fits right through, and it fits perfectly. You're not gonna have any fitment issues. If you do have a holster that has a front end that is enclosed, you're gonna have to modify it to get this to work. And there's a lot of holster companies out there. T-Rex just leaves the front open. And this is what I was typically running for my OWB setup. And it's just really cool that it actually fits in here nicely. I didn't have to modify my holster. So now moving our way up the handgun, it gets us to the Compensator. This is obviously a device made for reducing recoil. The Harrington Arms HCEC Compensator has a top port that is going to reduce the muzzle flip of the handgun, and side ports which are going to reduce the in-the-hand felt recoil of the handgun. This Compensator obviously does a large portion of the work here and helping fight some of that recoil. So one thing to keep in mind here is we are running a compact slide. If we ran a full-size slide, the Compensator would be pushed further out, creating a better leverage point. The further this Compensator gets out, the less leverage the gun is going to have over your hand. So one thing to keep in mind here is this is the compact slide. With this Compensator and this frame, we are seeing 28% reduction in recoil. This is without the weapon light and the anchor. If you were to throw on just a TLR-1 without the anchor, you would get an additional 10%, which that would take you to 38% reduction in recoil, comp, frame, and light without the anchor. So that's actually really impressive. One thing of note here is I think if we threw a lighter and a smaller red dot on here, we'd get a better recoil reduction here. So keep that in mind. The larger the optic is that you throw on this build, the more reciprocating mass you're gonna have, theoretically making it have more felt recoil. While we're talking about this optic, this is a lead and steel PB3 enclosed optic. It's incredibly similar to the Acro. It actually uses the same footprint. One thing that's really nice about this company is you can go buy an adapter plate. However, with the Springfield Echelon not having an RMR cut, it's a proprietary system. This adapter plate had room on either side of the plate itself. So the two screws that mounts the plate to the Echelon slide is pretty much where all the recoil was going of this optic. And we actually had a catastrophic failure snapping both of those screws off, causing the optic to loosen up. This is obviously not the optic's fault. If you put this optic on an Acro slide cut, I think it would be rock solid. However, be careful with the Springfield Echelon in general. If you throw a larger optic on here, the way the system is, you're gonna wanna make sure you get the proper plate to mount it. In this case, if we would've reached out to Springfield and got an Acro plate for this, probably would have been no problem. So don't do what we did. Make sure you use the proper plate and not just an adapter plate. So when it comes to the final recoil numbers of this build, it's obviously not gonna be a perfect test. The optic broke off mid-testing. Unfortunately, that is going to sway the numbers a little bit low or a little bit high. It depends on how you look at it. But honestly, I think it's gonna be relatively accurate. So take this for what you will. It's not a perfect test. Unfortunately, the optic broke off. What we're seeing is a 48% reduction in recoil comparing this gun to this gun. Imagine that there's no optic on here. You take a stock Springfield Echelon, you throw all this stuff on here, you get a 48% reduction in recoil. And honestly, that's really impressive. The fact that you can reduce nearly 50% of the recoil with a handful of attachments, it is really cool, and that's why we're interested in reducing felt recoil. I felt like I could shoot this gun great, and I could have follow-up shots really fast. If we could add a better trigger in here and more weight to this build, this would be a dream competition setup. If that's why you're building this, I think that's a great reason to build a heavy setup. This is obviously not ideal for concealed carry. It's way too heavy. I probably wouldn't even run this for a nightstand gun. Where this shines is competition. And if you want to spend a little bit of money on the Springfield Echelon platform, you can do that and achieve a really aggressive competition build. One thing to keep in mind with this build is it does weigh 2.8 pounds without any ammunition in it. So this is a really heavy setup, and that's definitely part of the reason why we're reducing so much recoil. It's just something you gotta take into consideration if you want to be interested in pulling around a 2.8 pound handgun. One thing I think that's worth noting about the Springfield Echelon is this is one of the first guns that has an FCU style system like the Sig Sauer that is actually taking advantage of it. We see this FCU style handgun trend really popping off right now. A lot of gun manufacturers are replicating that, but nobody's actually jumping in with the aftermarket support and making a useful setup. The Springfield Echelon is really cool because you can do this integrated style like you can with the P320, but it's a Springfield Echelon. If you guys want to see more information about the Harrington Arms anchor, make sure you go to harringtonarms.com and check out this new product. Otherwise, if you guys like this video, please like and subscribe. We'll see you next time.